Welcome to the Period Besties podcast with Stasha and Katie. Think about it as chatting with your best friends about all the TMI stuff you've never talked about before with two period coaches who've been helping hormones collectively for over 20 years now. I'm Stasha.
And I'm Katie, and we're pulling back the curtain on what it's like in the world of menstrual coaching. From puberty to menopause and everything in between, we're here to show you how period coaching can save the day. We'll share practical tips and information you can put to immediate use to improve your hormones and happiness.
We're removing the mystery, ending the taboo, and shining a light on just how powerful period coaching can be.
So whether you need period coaching or are considering becoming a period coach yourself, these episodes are going to help you. We'll share stories, coach live on air, and bring smart, savvy guests to share their wisdom too. Let's start today's episode.
Welcome to the Period Besties podcast. Today, Katie and I got some really great questions from our workshop that we did. We just wrapped up the Nourish and Flourish workshop, and we had great questions from the people who came live and emails from the people who were able to make it live. And don't worry, if you missed it, we're going to do it again in the new year. So stay tuned for that. But it was such fun and it was so good. And we had a lot of questions, which we have answered in previous podcast episodes, especially about like foods and things. So if you haven't listened to those earlier episodes, like on protein and breakfast, lunch, and snacks and dinners, go have a listen. In the meantime, we had some great questions about HRT, and we thought it would be nice to dive in because it's not your mom's HRT anymore. So we thought today would be a nice day to have a little bit of a recap of some of the things that are coming out, and also just share that there are studies happening now. So keep an eye out. More information is coming out. We're learning more things about it. You're going to have to talk to your doctor and ask some questions about things that you may not have thought. So yeah, we thought we'd give you all a little rundown on, not your mom's HRT this time.
I love it. And if you haven't already listened to Dr. Carrie Jones' episode, if you want to dive more into testing an HRT, just want to share that too, because the episode was incredible. And I actually left feeling very hopeful at the end of that conversation about where she was seeing women's health and research going. So that was very uplifting and felt like, okay, yes, like we're getting answers. There's more research. There's more things coming out to support us. So definitely go back and listen to that episode as well. If you have an appointment coming up with your doctor and you have questions, I think this will help solidify what type of questions you might want to be asking your doctor.
Absolutely. I used that episode. I was asking my doctor to get my blood work panel done, and I used Carrie's information to make sure that I was getting the appropriate tests done at the appropriate time. So that was really helpful. So absolutely go listen to that episode. It was so good. So I guess we should just kick this off with one of the questions we got during the workshop was simply, what's the deal with HRT these days? I heard that it caused cancer. I definitely don't want to increase my cancer risk, but now I'm hearing more and more that people are using HRT. So she was feeling very confused. Great conversation, good question. And that is partially because of how it was reported. So we talked a little bit about this with Dr. Carrie Jones, but that study, the Women's Health Initiative, was done back in 2002. And there was a lot of different branches to the study. And unfortunately, one of the branches got picked up by the media. And so that was what they were reporting on, was just one of the branches. So they were studying a lot of different parts of HRT, estrogen, progesterone, combinations, all sorts of different things. And something that Katie and I have talked about in this podcast before is that progestin is an inflammatory hormone. It's what's in birth control pills. It's what helps prevent you from getting pregnant, right? It puts you in this inflammatory state to help keep you from being able to ovulate or have the egg implant, these kinds of things, depending on what form of hormonal birth control you're using. And that does increase your cancer risks, right? We know birth control pills can increase certain types of cancer. And in that study, that same information came out. And so the headlines ran with HRT causes cancer because that's the soundbite, right? Even 22 years ago now, that was the clickbait headlines existed. So that was the headline. And all of HRT got smeared with the same paintbrush that it causes increased risks of cancer. And immediately afterwards, people taking HRT dropped by half, right? So within a very short time of that study coming out, about half of the people who were on HRT dropped it immediately. And it has been something that doctors were resistant to talk about or use with patients. And it was something most people like myself were against as well, right? I have a sister and an aunt and a grandmother who all diagnosed in their 30s, right? So it's a BRCA gene carrying family. So we, of course, were all worried about our breast cancer risks. And my mom and I are very dedicated to making sure we're doing the things to help reduce your risks of breast cancer because of it. Of course, we were all very anti-HRT in my house as well. But now that this more information is coming out, I've been rethinking HRT. My hardline stance is not a hardline stance anymore. And I've been looking into it myself. So it's definitely something that, a lot of us had this idea of, and it's maybe time to start retracing our steps of what that study really showed in all of its branches, as well as what new studies coming out today are looking at.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point because, like you said, that clickbait was real.
Yeah.
And if you're interested, you can read the study. You can Google Women's Health Initiative, the study. It spanned over more than 26 years, I believe. Like, it was a very long study. I think it's actually going up until 2026, if I read that correctly when I was researching it. So it's a very, very long study. And again, what they just pulled out, that headline, is the progesterone, right? So you want to go back and read about progesterone and estrogen and the different combinations, not just the estrogen with the progesterone. Like, it's very, very different. So I think that's really important. Like, it's out there. Google it. You can read it. You can read articles about it that talk about the different branches of that study. But again, that was just one study. And unfortunately, I feel like that happens with pretty much every medical study out there. Whether there's something good that's found in a study, they always go with that scary clickbait. And then a lot of times doctors, they want to care for us. So they want to be very, very cautious. And the fact that half of the women that were taking it stopped, it's no wonder they had a very, very, very difficult time going through perimenopause and that transition, since they weren't really getting that support.
Yeah, absolutely. And so some of the things that we know now is that, first of all, HRT in and of itself is a very big blanket statement. There's a lot of different versions of HRT. And now they're also using terms like MHT, menopausal hormone therapy, HT, just plain old hormone therapy, or BHRT, bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. So we have all these different names now that are starting to surface as well, and they can mean different things. So even saying like MHT versus HRT is still not telling you specifically what hormones and when. So one of the things that you really have to keep in mind is that you are unique. So the risks of things change based on age, based on combination, based on underlying symptoms, based on other health conditions, right? Genetic predispositions, all these sorts of things. So you are a unique compilation of health and history and needs and quality of life desires. So you have to talk to a doctor that A, knows what they're talking about, and B, can take all of that into account, right? Because some of our doctors don't even know the difference between progestin and progesterone. It's common. It happens a lot. It's certainly something Katie and I have heard from our clients over and over and over again over the years, is having that conversation with doctors and then realizing that their doctor wasn't educated on that, because again, women's health is not really a high priority for most doctors, especially since in the US, you start with a primary care doctor that has very little women's health training. And even if you go to an OBGYN, sometimes they're not necessarily up on the most recent information either. So it's definitely something that you may have to try a few doctors to get to one that understands the intricacies of it, and have somebody who's even menopausally informed, which can be a little bit of a challenge too. So you don't want to just listen to the blanket statements, right? It's easy to be like Instagram and you scroll through and it's like, oh, HRT, estrogen, I'm going to do that. But you probably want to talk with your doctor about it. What are really the pros and cons? And then asking your doctor some of those questions to make sure that they actually know what they're talking about in the first place, so that you're not getting just written off out of the gate. Or I've been seeing a lot on Instagram, like the estrogen patches for perimenopause. And one thing that I haven't seen is that those estrogen patches can include progestin. They're just called an estrogen patch, but they can include progestin as well, which we know progestin is something that we want to avoid unless we need it because of some severe other issue. So it's definitely something to the effect of like, okay, if you're like, hey, I want to take the estrogen patch, you still need to go to your doctor and say, what estrogen patch is this? Does it have progestin in it? Is it a bioidentical estrogen? And have that conversation with them. And if they're saying, oh, well, I don't know, it doesn't matter, or any of that dismissive verbiage, then it may be time for a new doctor, at least for this aspect of your care.
Yeah. And I think another good question that came up about this too was the difference between compounding and hormone replacement therapy. And the difference is that the pharmacy itself is a compounding pharmacy and they're making that hormone versus going to like CVS or Walgreens or Walmart. But you still want to check to make sure that the compounding hormone they're making is the progesterone, which it usually is, I'll say that, but you always want to double check, triple check, confirm what the compounding pharmacy is, because a lot of times, especially I would say like 5-6 years ago, most people were going and thinking about compounding the hormones versus like the doctors because of, I don't know necessarily the study or what it was, but it definitely was a theme that was happening more. And now I think that we've been talking more about bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, compounding under similar umbrellas. That's shifting that conversation too. But it just depends. Like you can go to a pharmacy and they can compound. It's usually more of like, especially I'm thinking back in LA, when I started doing hormones for my thyroid, right? Like this was 8-9 years ago, my naturopath had me go to a compounding pharmacy, and then eventually I could get something very similar at CVS, right? So things have shifted and changed in that way too. But I think that was a really, really good conversation and question that came up during our workshop too about the compounding.
I spoke to my doctor about it as well. And she said that essentially the same thing, that you can go to a compounding pharmacy, but as long as we're putting in the prescription for this, which is a bioidentical hormone, then you can also just head over to Walgreens or CVS or Costco or wherever your local pharmacy is, and it would be the same essentially at the end of the day. So if you're in the States, that's certainly something to just know, that as long as you're talking to your doctor and you're saying, I don't want and it really usually comes down to the progesterone, right? It's usually progesterone where they try and give you progestin instead, because it's the same thing, quote unquote, but it's not. It is very much not the same thing. So you just want to make sure that if you are starting to take progesterone, that you're getting a prescription for progesterone, not progestin. So you just want to have that short conversation. When I got my prescription for progesterone, I just said, it's progesterone, right? Not progestin. And she was like, yep, absolutely. It's just progesterone, nothing else in there, just whatever the filler is to make the pill, but otherwise it's just progesterone. So you're good. Just make sure that you're doing it. But I went through Planned Parenthood, and they do tend to be up and informed on these things a bit more than, say, an average older doctor who may or may not be keeping up with the times. So that was nice. But yeah, usually it's just the progesterone, but it certainly doesn't hurt to ask these days and make sure that whatever you're getting is really, truly what you're asking for.
And like Google, right? Like the exact name that's on that capsule, Google it and just make sure, because it will tell you what's in there too. The other thing that I think we should definitely talk about that came up during the workshop was birth control.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the ladies that joined us, her doctor was like, just go on birth control. And she was asking us, what do you think about that? Why would they suggest that? What do you think? And I think that honestly, so many women are told to go on birth control when they're going through perimenopause. The woman that we had, Stacy, who we did the live coaching call with, that was the exact same thing that she was told, and she ended up feeling worse. Which is horrifying because she was already not feeling good. And then to be told to be put on birth control, to try it and feel worse than she was feeling at the beginning is, oh God, it makes me so irate. Like, it's so frustrating.
It's just lazy. To me, it's such lazy doctoring to just go, oh, you're in perimenopause, go on birth control. If you're not on birth control already, which a lot of people are, perimenopause is really, that's when you're going to suggest going on to birth control. It feels so lazy to me from a perspective of, you went through all that work to become a doctor, and now your answer to everything is birth control.
Yeah. And basically what birth control is doing, it's shutting down ovulation. So instead of your body producing progesterone, because you only produce progesterone when you ovulate, your body is basically in menopause because you're not ovulating and you're using these synthetic hormones to mimic a cycle in your body. So as we've talked about so many times, progesterone is not just for ovulation. We need progesterone for bone health, heart health, memory. And I would like to make progesterone as long as I possibly can. So for longevity at this point in my life. So that was one of the big things we did spend a lot of time talking about, is the importance of tracking and charting and knowing our cycle, knowing when we're ovulating, hoping that continues for a longer period of time, not shutting that down, and the importance of it. And I think the more that we discuss that, the more that we talk about that, is so beneficial to all of us. Yeah, but it's the number one thing. I mean, I have a friend who's going through something completely different, and the doctor is like, oh, just go on birth control. Yeah. And I was like, but then what happens 2 years from now when you go off of it and you have the same exact thing going on? That's maddening. That's insanity, right? Isn't that the definition of an insanity? Is doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting a different result.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I see this in the endometriosis community because for the most part, that's what we're all told, just go on birth control, go on continuous birth control, just basically don't have a period as much as possible until you're into menopause, except you don't know when you're in menopause because you have effectively attempted to eliminate your cycles. It has so many long-term health complications to do that. A lot of people like myself had the endometriosis symptoms right out of the gate. So had I been following my doctor's advice, I would have been on birth control from my teens when I first got my first period. And in fact, one of my best friends, who's 10 years older than me, so she's ahead of the game, but that's exactly what happened to her. She was on back-to-back birth control her entire life, her entire menstruating life. And then in her early 50s, she was like, I don't know, I might be in menopause. How would I know? Once or twice a year, I have a breakthrough bleed from being on back-to-back birth control. I haven't had one in a while, so I think I'm going to go off it and see what happens. And this is the same story that you hear in endometriosis communities, right? So every time I jump into one, I see that same story playing out again and again, where were on birth control. And so if you're being prescribed birth control for perimenopause, you're in that same boat where now you're on birth control. Because you're on birth control, you're going to have a withdrawal bleed. That's not an ovulation bleed. So you're not going to really necessarily know when you go through menopause, or if you've gone through menopause, or if you might have gone through it earlier, or it leaves a lot of questions. Unfortunately, I haven't noticed any answers or studies on any of this. Endometriosis is terribly understudied, and perimenopause is just starting to get studies really done on it. So I haven't seen anything yet. If anyone out there listening has, please send them to me. I want to know. Email is in the show notes. But yeah, so it puts you in a really difficult position because you don't know what's real. You don't know what's actually happening in your body. As you just said, if you can't really be charting, well, you can chart for other things, but you aren't really knowing because you're not ovulating. Perimenopause is already mystery. And now you're going to add this other layer of making it even harder when that's not necessarily the way to go. And one of the things that did come out of that women's initiative, looking at the study and coming back out and looking at more of it, was that it seemed like there were a lot less complications when you were younger. So being in your 70s or 80s and having some issues and being put on HRT is going to come with different complications than using HRT more like a replacement, right? Dr. Carrie Jones talked about this, how you wouldn't tell somebody with thyroid issues to wait until their thyroid completely turned off and then supplement. So it's that same kind of concept of you don't necessarily need to wait until you're in full menopause. Everything has completely shut down to start HRT. So that's something that I'll be interested in following and seeing if more studies come out, more information on that comes out. But overall, and like I said, you are a unique health history. So this might not apply to you, but it seems like overall, if you're going to start taking some kind of hormone replacement, that it may be in a better interest to start as things are shifting and replace those lowering levels before they take a nosedive. And then it seems like it has less long-term health effects, and that you can it's not a forever thing, right? You're not going to necessarily be on HRT for the rest of your life, but to help make that transition a little bit easier and a little less erratic by supplementing with those hormones, whether it's progesterone or estrogen or a combination of them. And some people are recommending pulsing it. Some people are recommending just a steady low dosage. So again, you need to talk to your doctor and see what works well and what would be best for you. But it does seem that one of the overarching things coming out of that study was there were less health complications if you started it in your younger years and used it as a supplement to wean yourself off in a more graceful way down the line than starting it after you hit menopause and are down the road. And that may happen. You may have to take it for some other reason, but it does seem like that was one of kind of the overarching things that has come out of that study since then, and showing that could be better at the younger age than necessarily waiting until you're fully in menopause and you've gone through all the withdrawal and all of the drama and then picking it up. So we'll see what comes out of that, if more studies will back that, if more information will come out about that as they dig through that old study now and come out with more conclusions based on the hormones that we have now. Because keep in mind, there was also different hormones, right? It's just like the birth control pill. The birth control pill started off in a very different dosage than what we have now. And HRT is the same. It started off with different compounds and different dosage points than we have now. So I'll be interested, especially to see with the newer versions, lower dosages, more bioidentical hormones, different compounds, different combinations, these kinds of things. I'm going to be really interested to see what studies come out now with not your mom's HRT and what that really comes to look like for us in later years.
Definitely. And something that we can all think about too is HRT is like the last thing on the pyramid, the top of the pyramid, I guess I should say. All of us can really focus on nutrition and movement and sleep and stress management, supplements, right? There's all these things that we can do to support our bodies, to keep our blood sugar balanced, and then have these conversations with our doctors, right? Dr. Carrie Jones, what I loved about her interview too, is she's like, you don't want to just jump to HRT without building the foundation and really taking care of your health. So if you are interested in really taking time to learn more about eating for perimenopause, like movement, all these different things, definitely come join us in the new year. We'll be running our Nourish and Flourish Eating Well Through Perimenopause workshop again, and we'll walk you through all of this. We'll also answer questions about HRT, but I think we're both really passionate about helping you all with that foundation to your health, because that is so vital for your overall health. Like and you can't skip that step.
Right.
Please don't skip that step.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the whole idea behind HRT is to help reduce those immediate symptoms and then to encourage a longer, healthier life, right? So that in your 70s, 80s, 90s, beyond, that you have a healthy time. And you can't do that with just taking the supplement, right? You can't do that with just taking a pill. There has to be, right? You can't lay on the couch eating chips and expect to have a healthy later life, where you still need to eat the healthy foods. You still need to nourish in order to flourish. And one of the things that we talked about in that workshop was how it could be as simple as rearranging what you're already eating to be more advantageous for your blood sugar levels, your metabolism boosters, these kinds of things. And the ladies in the workshop were all like, oh my God, that's such a relief. Like, that's an easy thing that I can do now and start with. And then we can start introducing some of these other things. And there was a collective sigh of relief when we got to that part of the workshop where it's like, okay, here's how you can rearrange what you're already eating in order to make it better for you. And then you can start moving into these other things. So you do need to have that foundation for sure, in order to have that longer health and to have those things like a better night's sleep. The better night's sleep is not going to come just necessarily based off of taking a hormone or a supplement or something to that effect. It can help, but if you're running yourself ragged into the wee hours of the morning and then you're wondering why you're not getting any sleep, that's there you go.
Got to keep that cortisol, ladies. Like, that cortisol, no matter where you are in your hormonal life, right? Like, that's the most important thing to be conscious of. But yeah, it's Not Your Mother's HRT. Come join us in February. Date to come. We are really excited to support all of you with that. Hope this was helpful. Definitely go back and listen to Dr. Seider's interview as well. She talks a little bit about this as well, Dr. Jones. And of course, all the episodes on just what to eat. Every single meal, every single snack, dessert ideas to help you as well as you're just figuring out what to put on your plate.
And stay tuned for next year, because our second season is going to have some interviews with some menopause writers, educators, as well as more movement and all sorts of good things coming in this new year. So stay tuned for our next year. So go catch up over the holiday break if you are behind on a few episodes, and then join us again for season 2 in 2025. And we'll be talking about all of these things in more in depth. If you have suggestions on topics for our second season, please let us know. Slide into the DMs, shoot us an email, whatever your preferred form of communication. But we are open for taking subjects for next year's podcast. So let us know now so that over the holidays we can prepare for you. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you all in the next episode. Bye for now. A big shout out and thank you to our sponsors for today's episode, Period Coaching School and Katie Bressack Wellness.
Thanks to you, our favorite bestie, for listening to the Period Besties podcast, where no topic is TMI. And of course, share this episode with your besties.
Remember to leave us a 5-star review, nothing less than the best for us besties, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
You can follow us on Instagram at Stasha Washburn and at Katie Bressack, or email us at periodbestiespodcast@gmail.com.
Check out more about us at katiebressack.com and periodcoachingschool.com. And of course, check the show notes for free goodies and extras that support this episode.
We'll see you on the next episode.
Bye for now, besties.